All right, hi, welcome to the broadcast. Today we have Steve Kyser, right? And Steve, tell me, what right now are you doing? You're running for state representative of Meridian, right?
Not in Meridian. Well, it's my district is partly Meridian, but more Boise. Goes from Eagle Road to Maple Grove. It's District 15, Seat A for the state legislature, the House of Representatives.
East. Well, tell us about, kind of catch you up to how you got to Boise, how long you've been here.
Well, I had a long career with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I think it really prepared me for wanting to come here and get a break from big city Los Angeles. And some of my family members had encouraged me to look into Boise. And I thought it'd be an ideal place to retire with my wife of now 47 years married. And so I looked into it. It was everything I would want. And
when was this?
This was, it was toward the end of 2016 that I was looking into it. Did most of my research online, and then I came out for one visit to Boise, and sadly, I guess typically of Californians, I decided to put an offer on a house on my first visit.
So you bought a house first off, you moved here in 2016.
I actually moved here the beginning of 2017.
So you were way ahead of the curve.
Oh yeah. Basically, yeah.
You were smarter.
A lot of the growth and changes,
And also, you told us something that makes majority of us hate you because you bought a house in 2016.
Right. Yeah. And I wasn't being smarter. It was just being lucky, and just God's grace in my life.
Yeah. Well.
Right. Yeah. And I wasn't being smarter. It was just being lucky, and just God's grace in my life.
Yeah. Well, what drives you in life? What motivates you? What motivates you? What do you want to accomplish with the second half of your life?
Well, helping people has been a huge part of my life since the beginning. I was born with being raised by a single mom who had serious trouble with addictions and some psychiatric symptoms. And I just had one sibling, a brother 1 year older. And so when she got pregnant with me, she desperately did not want to be pregnant. And that's a long story, but thankfully I was born healthy. And
your mom did not want to be pregnant?
She did not want to be pregnant at all. She knew that her marriage was over, and she felt really helpless. And so she wanted to explore an option to terminate the pregnancy, and thankfully some key people were able to talk her out of that.
What year was this?
This was in 1955.
Really?
Right, and she did eventually go to a clinic where they were going to do the abortion, and an employee, a nurse of the clinic, was actually the one that primarily talked her out of it.
What did she say to your mom?
She did enough of an interview to be able to say, well, you have two parents who love you, you have siblings, you're a smart person, capable, and you're going to have the support system you need to get through this and be able to raise a second child successfully.
So she already had one child.
Right, but who was just a little baby.
Brother, sister?
Yeah, brother.
So how, 2 years older than you? A year?
No, he's a year older.
And 50. What city were you in 55?
So we were in Los Angeles, South Los Angeles.
What part of Los Angeles?
Well, it was the South Los Angeles near Florence and Normandy, which 10 years later was the kind of the spark of the first Los Angeles riots.
Yeah, so that's, what's the town's name? No, not Compton, no.
Oh, they use the term Watts.
Oh, so you're up north, closer to the 10.
Closer to the 10.
Yeah. That was right near where the riots, right where the riots happened.
And then the subsequent riots in 1992 broke out.
Did you grow up
in the same area?
In that same area? Did you grow up in the same area?
For the most part, for about 10 years.
what year were the riots? In the 60s?
Yeah, 1965. So,
Where were you guys? Where did you live at the time?
well, you know, the riots broke out during the summer, and I was living with my grandparents on 69th Street, like I say, right near Florence and Normandy. And it was a very stressful time because my grandfather and my uncle both had very dangerous circumstances when they were driving near the city. They were able to protect themselves with firearms without shooting anybody, but you know, they had the chance to, in a very threatening situation, show the firearm and be able to make their way out of a dangerous situation safely. Although
to show the firearm to who?
To potentially very violent, large crowd of protesters in the street that were blocking the cars, and so they both in separate situations were able to make their way through the crowd, and except that the windshields got broken by something, bottle or rock or something. So I just wasn't aware of it because I was home when these kinds of things occurred, but I was aware that it was very scary, very dangerous, and because I heard the adult conversation about it. I was 10 years old, and I know that they were able to come out safe without being hurt or hurting anybody. And then in the 92 riots, by that time I was a Los Angeles police officer, a supervisor on the department, responding to the riots and working together with actually the regular U.S. Army, who also responded to help bring peace back to the city. But in my childhood, I was relatively unsupervised, a so-called latchkey kid, as well as my brother, kind of raising ourselves. I was always full of lots of mischief, causing all kinds of trouble.
First, this is very important, interesting. So, would you say, did you know many black people that were just normal, just like you, just regular, peaceful, awesome people, just like you? So,
it was a very blended neighborhood throughout the street, both black and Hispanics and whites, and that all got along very, very well, very peacefully. You know, my best friend next door was a white, and then next to him were a family of Hispanics, but on the other side of me was a family of blacks, and everybody got along marvelously. At age 10, I didn't understand that race made a difference.
Yeah, right. I didn't either. Would you then agree that genetics and skin color matter nothing? We're all the same people.
Right. I think when you grow up around anybody you grow up around, you get comfortable with, and you feel like you share every aspect of humanity with them, and you connect hearts readily. And children are so good at doing that; they're friends with anybody who's close by. It's kind of by nature, I think.
Yeah. So you tell me. So you grew up around a Hispanic, a black family, and a culture in the city of Watts that was very diverse, and you had a nice, peaceful relationship with everybody, right?
Oh yeah, it was very peaceful. We were all friends, and so it was kind of shocking when this event occurred, and I didn't.
Which event?
The 65 Watts riots, because I didn't really even associate it as being a race incident. I just associated it with my family being in danger.
How did that affect you and change who you became? You grew up in a very tense area. Did that lead you to becoming a cop? What drove you? What did you want to solve?
I did not experience it as being a tense area at all at any time. I was just aware that there was a time period when my family was in danger, and my mom ended up moving us further toward West Los Angeles right after that time, and then from West Los Angeles down to Orange County for a couple of years. It didn't really impact...
You said your mom. What happened to your dad?
My dad really wasn't a part of my life. I had a couple of very vague childhood memories of him bringing me gifts. But other than a couple of vague memories, I didn't really know anything about
What's your dad's... Your mom, when you were conceived, was
married to him at the time.
Okay. What happened?
They ended up going through a divorce. I had some childhood vague memories that I was sensing that I was not going to be able to see my dad again. I went for a long time without seeing him. He came back into my life just for a very brief visit, would bring me a present, and I had this sense of, I love this present because it was a very, very special thing to me. It was a Tonka truck. It was large, something I could really enjoy playing with my friends. And so I was very happy about the gift, but I was feeling in my heart, I really don't care about the gift. I just want to see my dad more. It's a very hard time for me. But then after those couple of visits, I never really saw him again.
What year was the last visit you're saying?
Well, that would have been approximately 1959.
How old were you? 4.
4, basically, yeah. And then I saw him briefly for one day when I was 14, and he was staying at the Salvation Army. He had become a homeless, drunk wino in Los Angeles. Homeless it turned out, for decades. And after age 14, I didn't see him again until I was in my 50s, and I looked him up on the internet.
You're about 55, 60 now, right?
Well, actually, I'm a young-looking 67.
Wow, that's great. Looking back on your life, how can you tell your life was shaped by that relationship with your dad, which was non-existent?
Well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was a very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief. Okay. I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
yeah. Which was non-existent.
Well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was a very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
Yeah. Which was non-existent.
well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
Yeah. Which was non-existent.
well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
Of life.
of life? Oh,
Yeah, I was, because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
Yeah. Which is non-existent.
well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
Of life.
of life? Oh,
Yeah, I was, because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
Yeah. Which is non-existent.
well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
Of life.
of life? Oh,
Yeah, I was because of my mischief.
okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. and,
Yeah. Which was non-existent.
Well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some three classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot.
Yeah. Which was non-existent.
Well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some three classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot.
Which was non-existent.
Well, My mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life?
Oh, yeah, I was because of my mischief. Okay. I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
yeah. Looking back on your life, how can you tell your life was shaped by that relationship with your dad, which was non-existent?
Well, my mom was really, and my grandmother were the people that really shaped me internally the most. My mom was very honest and upfront with me about how she never wanted to be pregnant with me. She had wanted to abort me. There was a deep heart damage related to that because I never felt that I deserved to be alive. That was very hard feeling. But her mom, my grandmother that I called Nana, she really fed my soul in a real positive way and brought some elements of healing, telling me about God's love for me. And she insisted that my mom have me go to church on a regular basis, which I did. And then when I was in high school, I was influenced by some 3 classmates that talked to me about Jesus quite a bit. I ended up going to their church, and there was a youth pastor that I admired that was a tremendous influence on me. And when I prayed to receive Christ, I had this sense right away that I had been adopted by God the Father. And that was a very huge healing in my heart. I think that really turned my life around and opened the door to stay on a real healthy path and be able to have a professional career without the damage of the early years really having a negative impact on my life through drugs or failure or inability to get along with people and things like that. So the first 8 years I was on a trajectory probably in the wrong direction in terms of my ability to get along with people, always getting sent to the principal's office at school and things like that.
Your first 8 years
of life.
Of life? Oh,
yeah, I was because of my mischief.
Okay.
I was so mischievous, you know.
Why do you think you were mischievous?
Lack of supervision, kind of a wounded heart, low self-esteem, kind of always dirty and barefoot. And,
yeah. What was it like? How old were you when your friends introduced you to Jesus Christ? How old were you when your friends at school introduced you to Jesus Christ?
I was 14 and in 9th grade, which was actually middle school at that time, and these 3 girls were just very, very persistent over the entire school year. And finally, toward the end of the school year, convinced me to go to church with them. And like I mentioned, there was a youth pastor that I really admired, and he kind of took me under his wings and became an excellent mentor for me to learn how to stand up for myself in a real positive way. And he really helped build my self-esteem, my confidence, and that made a huge difference for me.
He became a powerful father, man figure to you.
Very much so. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Where was, a lot of people are listening, and myself have been to Los Angeles or lived there, so we'd recognize what part of the city was that church in. We always get confused, different valleys. Is the San Fernando Valley the valley, like north on the 405? Right. We always get confused, different valleys. Is the San Fernando Valley the valley, like north on the 405?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So the one that they call the valley.
Yeah. The one over by Pasadena's calls something different. Okay.
Yeah.
So the church was up in Reseda.
Yes.
Up in the valley.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What did it, the man you became, how would you describe it? How would you describe the man you've become? And what along your journey molded you and shaped you? First off, what drives you now? What have you noticed? Why did you become a cop? What drove you and what drives you now?
Well, the key people, half a dozen people that played key roles of mentoring in my life that really gave me my individual epiphanies that added together, gave me a lot of self-confidence to be very gentle and kind and soft, but to be able to be as strong as I needed to be in a situation that required strength and authority and what they call in police work, command presence. So I felt like I always had the right balance, and people, when I started becoming interested in police work, they said, "You're way too nice to be a cop." And that compliment continued really throughout my career because, again, I had the confidence to be as strong as I needed to be to handle a situation appropriately, and but respecting all people. So I met a male nurse because I was working as a nurse's aide for a few years prior to my law enforcement career. And again, this was a guy who had confidence, he had strength, he was articulate, and his goal was to eventually go into nursing administration. So I thought I would follow his path. And then at church, I had gotten to know an LAPD captain who, again, kind of took me under his wing. But by this time, I was married. And then we had our second child on the way, and who was eventually born before the captain finally had a very frank talk with me about what I thought about my future. And he said, "What is it you're going to do for a real career?" And I said, "Well, I'm either going to be a nurse or a teacher or maybe a pastor of a church." And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what, you're 22 years old, you have 2 young children, and you're not making much income as a nurse's aide. So why don't you come on my department? Your salary will be more than double what it is now while we train you, and then you'll get regular increases after you graduate. Just do all the right things in all the right ways, treat people with respect, follow policy, follow the law, and you'll advance in your career. You're eventually going to retire at a young age, and when you retire, you're going to be able to do the kind of things you want to do. You can go into church ministry, and you won't have to beg people for money to support your family. You'll be able to volunteer in the areas that you're interested in, whether it's in the medical field or anything else, work for nonprofits. And the financial pressure will not prevent you from from following your heart in helping people." He knew I had a big heart for helping and a sense of real generosity. And so he thought that would be good qualities actually on the police department. So
this was what years?
This was in 1977 and 1978. So I got the vision that he passed on to me, the long-term vision. And I started the police academy in early 1978, and I found out that my gifts and talents fit in really, really well with the police department. And again, being able to handle emergency situations, high stress situations, running into a fire to save lives on an occasion, having a couple of times when shots were fired in my direction. I never got into a situation where I had to shoot somebody. I was in situations where if I had shot, it would have been legally justifiable, but I was in a position of safety sufficiently to take the risk to not resort to a deadly force. I was very athletic. And
so you made 20 years on the force without shooting anybody?
Right, with never
in Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. Although there were lots of times when I had to draw my weapon because it was a situation that could have gone badly, but I never actually had to pull the trigger on anybody.
What do you think? I can't resist. We have to understand your perspective on this. What is really going on with race, blacks and whites in LA? Is it how much of it is real? What is real in LA? From your experience, what was real? How much was the genetic race, color of your skin thing an issue? What did people really think? Police and black people and white people in LA?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where, well over 90% of people don't look at race as being a factor in relationships. At the same time, there's been enough historical racist attitudes that people of color have had their hearts emotionally damaged through probably legitimate racist attitudes toward them that they've picked up on. And the thing is, when someone's been injured that way on several occasions, they may misinterpret other occasions and think, it's because I'm black, it's because I'm brown, or if it's a gender thing, it's because I'm a woman, which may be an interpretation, but it's a re-injury. So for them, even if it wasn't racist on the part of someone that in some way disrespected them, they experience it that way, and it's another injury. So we do have people with injuries. Now, my injury has never been feeling the victim of racism, but I've been injured by some of the struggles that I had as a child through my parents' breakup and my mom's drug addiction and psychiatric things, and trying to actually save her life when she had overdosed, and she made me aware of it, and I called 911, and they're saying, don't let her fall asleep. If she falls asleep, she'll die. Keep her awake, walk her up and down the living room until help gets there and things like that. So I've had a lot of wounding, and a lot of people have had a lot of racial related wounding. So it's a real thing. But I've seen attitudes of racism in Los Angeles significantly decrease over the decades that I've been there. And I think we're getting to a point where, we are starting to get past it, but we'll never be past it 100% because it's in human nature to connect more closely with the people who are most like us. And it's in human nature to be more suspicious and rejecting of people who are more different than we are. I had the benefit of growing in a blended neighborhood, so I never saw any difference, and I didn't grow up with a racist attitude, and nor did my neighbors of any type or color or gender.
I love that you had your experience probably seems like it. You grew up in Watts. You're on the police force. You went through both major riots in the 60s and 90s. You probably have one of the best, wouldn't you agree, one of the best perspectives on race in LA. You were a police officer, grew up in Watts, or a kind, gentle man and a Christian, and you've lived through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying, in a word, what has been going on? Many people of color, and black and Mexican, have been injured by racism things. Many people have been injured, and you can relate with that because you've been injured yourself by traumas with your mom, which are very substantial in how it affects you growing up. I had a similar story. I understand. I can relate. So you've said that, yes, there has been racist attitudes that have been hurting people in Los Angeles for a long time, and you've seen it decrease.
Mm-hmm.
When did it start to decrease, and how? Did it decrease to the point of like, I never even noticed it in LA. Never have, ever in my life. I've never seen any racism ever. Okay. When did you see it decrease, and how long? To what extent?
Well, there was conversation that occurred among officers, and people who have strong biases or racist attitudes don't seem able to keep it completely secret all the time. So others can kind of pick up on who seems to be racist and who's not. And it was my perspective that over time, and I don't know all the reasons for it, it has consistently decreased. And I think, it could be in the educational system, drawing awareness to it, emphasizing the importance of being sensitive to others and accepting and understanding where they're coming from. And I've always been a really good listener, so I kind of really connect hearts with people when they share their heart, honestly, with me, regardless of what their background is or where they're coming from. And I kind of feel like if I had their life experiences and was exposed to the same educational opportunities, the same reading materials, the same TV shows and family history and that I would share their worldview. And the reason that I have a different worldview is because I have different life experiences and exposure to different educational opportunities. And maybe race relations in the educational system has helped to reduce the amount of racial animosities in Los Angeles and throughout the country.
Then what do you think, all your amazing experiences, what would you say has been going on in the last 4 years, 2 years?
Well,
what has driven the madness? How much is media? How much erupted out of the social consciousness?
Right. So the media always plays a really huge role, and I used to look at it primarily as the media has to sell newspapers, they have to sell TV and radio and now internet. So they need to make money, so they try to sensationalize and make things a lot bigger than they are in reality to get people worked up emotionally. But I think in addition to that factor, there's also political agendas that are a driving force to try to divide Americans. And I think today, people are really fed up with all of the division that's been created, and there's just a desire to see more unity between Republicans and Democrats, between Republicans and Republicans, and just among our neighbors and things on Facebook. People are tired of the animosity, the hostility, the division, the insults, and we're all ready to take a very long break away from that and get united.
What is it? I mean, we're talking to people in Meridian. My brother and sister-in-law live in Meridian. What might people be feeling about Republican, Democrat, the labels, and this battle's war? What might they be feeling, and what does it mean to be Republican? And maybe someone doesn't want to identify as a Republican. What values are good?
Well, the politics on certain specific issues will tend to draw people in terms of their commitment to one party or another. But usually it's relationships that become the glue that keeps people, devoted to a party. And so they find that they have a lot in common. And one of the things about social media right now is that if we express interest on social media in a certain area, we get fed a lot more information on that. And so more and more people, rather than being exposed to a wide variety of views and perspectives, are exposing themselves so much to one line of thought and against a different line of thought that it's really got people kind of digging in their heels.
And like they want to just get to the truth and not have labels,
Right.
or just accept everything along a party line or on a
Right.
narrative line.
People want the truth, and politically, people, Republicans believe that they're exposed to a lot more truth than the Democrats. The Democrats believe they're exposed to a lot more truth than the Republicans. Republicans believe that they're exposed to a lot more truth than the Democrats, and the Democrats believe they're exposed to a lot more truth than the Republicans. There is a tendency on both sides, and in other parties as well, of course, but the two major parties where Republicans a lot of times will tend to think of Democrats as either being stupid or evil. And Democrats think the same thing about Republicans.
What do Democrats think of Republicans? And tell me some stories, if you have any, so I can understand.
Well, okay, because I've been going door to door a lot and talking to a lot of prospective voters and getting a lot of feedback on the issues, one of the things I could say is that the vast majority of people enjoy interacting and giving their political perspectives and communicating their values. But there are some people who the first thing they want to ask is, what party are you with? When I say Republican, the response by Republicans is great delight. When I say Republican, the response by Democrats is hostility. Now, and these are people that ask the question, and the vast majority of people don't ask the question, and it usually becomes readily obvious that I'm Republican. But if they ask, it's because they have very strong feelings about it. And so they are the ones that are feeding these feelings of the other side is either stupid or evil. And then the comments that come back that are complimentary to me from Republicans are really jumping to a conclusion about me because they don't know me at all. They only know that I'm Republican, but they've concluded I'm a really good person. The Democrats jump to the conclusion that there's something really wrong with me, and they want to right away give me a terrible attack. And
What do Democrats, I'd like to actually know, what have you experienced? Do they think must be wrong with you?
well, they're going to think something is wrong with me, and again, it's because they think that I'm not smart enough to see what they see.
What do they see?
What did
I
they say
really
about
want to know is what do the left or Democrats, people that watch mainstream news and believe mainstream, I don't even want to use Democrat or left, people who believe mainstream news, what do they think must be wrong with you or me or you?
Well, I think a lot of them think that I must not be smart enough to figure out what's really going on, and either I'm racist because I support a racist party with a racist former president.
What do they think racism is? Have you gathered? What do they actually think racism is?
Well, I think there's, they're probably suggesting racism is any kind of bias or negative attitude towards someone of a different race because of their color. And, most of the people that have been accused of being racist don't believe that they are, in fact, racist at all.
So a racist is someone that believes that one skin color or genetics are better inherently than another, right?
Yeah, exactly. That they're making judgments related to skin color and some aspect of being less than.
Yeah. So, would you say then how would you? Well, how one might want to say? I'd want to say that you can. it's a cultural issue. So the skin color and genetics matter nothing. I can be just as scared of a white person who looks scary as I can be with anybody else who looks scary, right? So is the thing that matters is how you portray yourself, how you carry yourself, your culture and your personality, and how you appear. Do you appear dangerous? Do you appear wearing a hoodie? What would you say?
Well,
What is the more appropriate or accurate way to analyze people, whether someone's a threat or not a threat? If you're walking down the street or walking down an alleyway, so to speak.
There probably are a lot of cultural elements, but there's, in terms of people's sense of fear, I wouldn't try to analyze what it is in terms of how they grow up and why they feel afraid. But if you have a white person that is afraid of a black person just because of their skin color, that could potentially occur.
Yeah.
Right? And the black person that knows that they could be a professional person or just an average kind person, good-hearted, non-criminal, and they can sense that someone's afraid of them. You know, a lot of minorities have had the experience where maybe someone crosses the street to walk on the other side, seemingly to avoid them. And again, that's another opportunity for whether they're interpreting the behavior accurately or not. Either way, it is a sense of injury when things like that happen.
Yeah.
Because they're thinking, I'm not a threat. There's no reason for you to be afraid of me. You're obviously just afraid solely because of my skin color.
I mean, like, I grew up, my wife's family is Russian, and they came of a certain sect who they want to ostracize anybody who's not part of that sect. And so I was a victim of racism in a sense, although I didn't care. But like certain members of that extended family wouldn't accept me because I wasn't Russian. So I can relate with that.
Right.
But and that I think it's so silly. Like, why? You guys are crazy. So they are crazy, though. That's a crazy view. Think that someone should be excluded just based upon anything. Would you agree that what matters is the person's choices and the moral character? That's what matters.
Right, yeah. I mean, like Dr. King had said, you know, the content of their character is what matters, not the color of their skin.
Why did a friend of mine who I went to school with, he was a black guy, very super smart guy. He was in the honors program. I couldn't make the honors program. He did. Super smart guy. 15 years later, I run into him on social. And he says to me, he was in the honors program at the school. He says to me, his views have changed completely. He says, no, you can't just disregard, you can't be colorblind. He says to me, you can't be colorblind. You must recognize me for my blackness. What does he mean? You have any idea? Because that's like inviting, that's asking me, that view is the opposite of what Martin Luther King said.
Yeah, I don't know where he would be coming from on that, but the fact is that, you know, we notice characteristics of people, the obvious characteristics. So we're going to notice if somebody is black, brown, or white, and how does that affect us? Does it have no effect in terms of the way we treat them? You know, it shouldn't. We really should love them and have our hearts connected to them and learn more about them, develop a friendship. But we're going to notice whether he's white, black, or brown, and you know, it doesn't have to be a negative thing in any way.
But isn't the right answer that you should evaluate a person based upon their appearance, whether they're appearing to be moral, trustworthy, upright standing, right?
Right, the character side of that
Yeah,
person.
you evaluate somebody like, I can evaluate group of teens who could be white, could be black, could be anything. But the way they're carrying themselves look kind of like suspicious, you know?
Right.
And so I went, okay, kids, come here, wife and child, come here, right? So, I mean, even the Israelis who had real evil on their doorstep every day would profile people by characteristics, not racist, not race, but by characteristics.
Right.
If you're likely to be, you know, they would not stop a grandmother and frisk her and then let the tall, strong guy go on without being frisked, right? Because the tall, strong guy is more likely to be a threat than the grandmother.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's common sense. So I'd say that, yeah, we're on the same page. Common sense, how a person appears, would they appear good. And we should treat people as people and just as people and accept their culture. Cool, it's great, sounds good. It's like different flavors, right?
Right, and the vast majority of people from all skin color and cultures have a heart for doing that.
And we can also, it's human nature to like and prefer to be around people that are like ourselves. Civilization, for all human history, has always liked to be around people like themselves, right?
Right.
Like you mentioned before. And we shouldn't discourage that. It's human nature. We want to be. And we then relate to people peacefully and friendly who are our neighbors. But we should not be forced to have people we don't share our same beliefs to be inside of our inner circle or inside of our community, right? You shouldn't be forced that way, but relate peacefully to other people that have different beliefs.
Right, it shouldn't be forced, but I think as a matter of personal conscience, for a lot of people, making an intentional effort to break away from the tendency to associate only with people most like ourselves, we should make an effort intentionally, voluntarily, to break that barrier. And regardless if it's race or anything else, when somebody new comes into a setting, a new child in a school, for example, or in some social group, I think we've all experienced that situation where we feel like we're being kind of ignored and being treated as an outsider, and all of the socialization is directed to people that they've already known for a long period of time. And so that it has that same kind of effect. And if we don't intentionally, voluntarily go out of our way to embrace the new person, embrace the person who's different, maybe it's a handicap, whatever it is, go out of our way to make that person feel a part of the group.
Yes.
And they're going to continue to be left out.
Yes. One of the biggest questions on people's minds, I found, especially in Meridian, they grew up Christian, they have doubts. You know, they get stretched. What does it really mean? They hear a lot of different things from Boise State, hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people from wherever they've been. What does it mean to be a Christian? And how did Christ, isn't it seminal to being a Christian, the issue of how to treat someone other than yourself, who's not like you? What did Christ teach about how to treat and love your neighbor and love someone other than yourself? You disagree with even?
Yeah, when I was 14, I first started to really learn and try to understand more about what Christ was all about. It was emphasized to me that it's not about religion, it's about relationship. And the first key relationship, is a relationship to Christ himself. And Christ, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is very similar to it. It's to love your neighbor as yourself. So he put those as the two top priorities of life. And in fact, he even added, in essence, that, that's the fulfillment of all the spiritual legal requirements, is to love God and love others. So all those other details will just kind of fall naturally into place if we have a heart full of love toward God and others. And if we get the love right, that's going to overcome, they say love covers a multitude of sins. We can make a lot of mistakes in our relationships, but if our heart is full of love, there's going to be forgiveness, there's going to be reconciliation, and we're going to work past our differences. And I found that, on LAPD, 90% of the officers were politically very conservative like me. My wife, who's also a political conservative, was with the Los Angeles Unified School District as a school psychologist, and maybe 90% of her peers, colleagues, were liberal. And
In what industry?
in the school district. And so when we would have social interactions with a large group of liberals, they very quickly and completely seemed to forgive us for our conservative worldview politically, because they knew of our love for them and our love for humanity, and we had good hearts, and they didn't care that we had these differences. In contrast to when you can go on Facebook or other social media and express social differences, and it results in intense hostility.
Because you don't have the personal relationship to understand your culture, your behavior, and acceptance and love with the other person.
Right, because with that love in your heart comes acceptance toward others.
But what labels are like a brand? You just hate it because you're told to hate it.
Right.
You grew up, me too, then I realized what I've understood a certain side to believe, so I've grown to understand my beliefs and own them for reasons. But what does it mean to be a conservative? You grew up, me too, then I realized what I've understood a certain side to believe, so I've grown to understand my beliefs and own them for reasons. But what does it mean to be a conservative?
Yeah,
What are you conserving? What,
Right,
better
exactly.
yet, what does it mean to be a conservative? Just forget about that. What are you about? And that answer can fill in what it means to be a conservative, or if you were, what it would mean to be a liberal if you were one. What are you about?
Yeah, my internal mechanism is love God, love others, serve humbly. So I look at that I'm on this earth for service for in God's name, basically, but that means serving others in His name. And to be arrogant is going to separate me from God. God's opposed to the proud, and He gives His grace to the humble. And so I can make all the mistakes along the way, which we all will, but if I'm humble enough to confess to Him, confess to others, ask for forgiveness, and even not only God, but people are so quick to forgive to people who humble themselves before them. So for me, it's I just love on people, and people pick up on that. So when I've gotten into politics, yes, there's been a very hostile response occasionally from people who are very strongly against Republicans. But I know if they got to know me, their attitude would change. And sometimes in a conversation, if the conversation continues for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, they'll start to realize that I'm really a very, very nice person, open to their ideas, understanding and caring.
Say your phrase again that you said, how it encompasses your mission and outlook. It was
my mission and outlook: love God, love people, serve humbly.
How does that manifest, or how is it extrapolated to how the government should be?
Yeah, well, they talk about the government should actually be the servant of the people, and not the people the servant of the government, because we're a representative form of government. We're a republic as well as a democracy, and so we're supposed to be representing the people, and so we need to listen to them, understand where they're coming from, what they want, and then incorporate governmental decisions based on what the people want. And a lot of times you can have issues, there's a lot of issues going on now where You know, you could talk to 80% of the people that would say it should be one way, but then maybe there's a decision coming from Washington, D.C. down through the state of Idaho and to our local communities saying no, and we feel like some decisions are shoved down our throats.
So on that notion, local government should be the highest, or should have a lot more importance.
Well, absolutely. You should be the one who directs your own life, because you're going to make the best decisions for who you are and what your needs are. The family unit should have decision-making power as a family. The local neighborhood should make decisions that are best for their neighborhood and the community. So the farther away you get, and that's what I'm concerned too about, you know, like a potential for a one world government and the movement toward globalism. We're going to make better decisions at the local level.
Right, so local, we should be able to be the most sovereign as possible, right? So if we want to do something and it's just going to affect us, we should be able to do that, right? And that's why it's dangerous to have a top-down federal system that could impose stuff on us locally that we don't want to do.
Right, you know who you are, you know what your desires are, you know what your path is toward happiness and well-being.
So like if a certain neighborhood in Meridian said, we all want to be smokers, every single person in this neighborhood wants to smoke, and the city of Meridian says we can't smoke, but this neighborhood, they should be able to smoke, right? I mean, if they smoke in their houses.
Yeah, I wouldn't break it down, you know, in this forum to the pros and cons of specific.
But my point is they should be able to do something if it doesn't affect someone else. They should be able to do it. They should be able to make decisions for themselves.
Right, it's the principle that you have rights, and if you're not violating other people's rights, then you should be free to exercise your rights. But where I was going with this was that, you know what's best for you. The family knows what's best for the family. The neighborhood knows what's best for the whole neighborhood. And the farther away you put the decision makers from you as an individual or your family, the worse decisions are going to be made. And so to put all the decision-making power into Washington, D.C., for example, over everything that occurs in Idaho is not in the best interest of Idaho, nor for the state to control what happens inside your home in terms of your rights and taking care of your family and making decisions in your family's best interest. The state should not run all the details of your life, and nor should someone in some body of government in Europe or somewhere else in the world, China, make all the decisions for the United States. Or
the debate always comes down, though, Steve, to how can we help those who can't help themselves or need help? How can we be loving, many people would say, and to those that are in need? And so they say the government needs to do that. The government needs to be the ones that love those. And so the government has to be there to take from those that have to give to people that don't have. And so how do we view the question of how do we help those in need? It always comes down, though, Steve, to how can we help those who can't help themselves or need help? How can we be loving, many people would say, and to those that are in need? And so they say the government needs to do that. The government needs to be the ones that love those. And so the government has to be there to take from those that have to give to people that don't have. And so how do we view the question of how do we help those in need? Well, because the idea of centralized government, the objection to what you're saying always is, well, that government needs to be there to help those that need help. So how do we help those that need help?
When you have a neighborhood of people whose hearts are connected, they're going to take good care of one another. And, I'll give one example of the Skid Row area of Los Angeles, where I've spent a lot of time helping people. And there are nonprofit organizations that do a great job without a tremendous amount of financial overhead of really helping meet the needs of a lot of people. and they get to know the people and they take care of them. In contrast to that, you can put together a huge government bureaucracy, which is extremely expensive, and the bureaucracy ends up trying to take more care of itself economically and doesn't necessarily know the people in need as well personally, and they're not nearly as efficient as neighbors taking care of neighbors. We're fortunate in the United States because of our prosperity and spirit of generosity throughout the country. I mean, Americans give a tremendous amount of money to help others in nonprofit organizations, for example, and they will meet the needs, and they'll do it much more efficiently.
How can this ask the question of the church? How can the church help people? And what's been your experience over the last 60 years of how the church has helped people, and what's happened to the church's relationship to helping people from Los Angeles to Idaho?
Well, there's always a small percentage that are doing most of the giving and the serving in any environment, but the churches I've been exposed to, which are very many, there's a lot of people in those churches who are helping people in very practical ways to improve their lives, whether it's sometimes giving to fill in the gaps because of poverty, but a lot of times it's teaching people to fish. A lot of people are involved in mentoring programs and helping others to find work when they're looking for work. So people are doing a great job of helping others, and they do it because they know them personally, and they do it through relationship.
So local communities, this is what I believe, and it sounds like it's what you also believe, that local communities are better at taking care of individuals in the local community than a state or a federal government.
They're far better, they're far more effective. The question becomes, will they do enough? Will they get the job completed? And one of the criticisms of pro-life people like myself have faced over the last several decades is, what are we going to do to help the desperate moms, for example? And I feel both sides, because I'm so strongly pro-life, because I'm alive, my 5 children are alive today, and my 7 grandchildren are alive today because of a decision to not abort me. And so I am strongly against abortion. But the other side of it is, who's going to help be that support system to people like my struggling mom in her early 20s, going through a divorce, struggling with addiction and things like that? Who's going to be their support system to help take care of that newborn and the child and throughout childhood and as teenagers or stuff? Will there be volunteer mentors, or do we have to get government bureaucracy involved, which is very expensive and inefficient, to fill in the gaps that volunteers won't do?
So we either have people who help other people and local communities, where we take on the responsibility through our churches or through some other organization, where we can find who needs to be helped, and then we help them ourselves with our organizations. Or we ask the government to build a big bureaucracy to try and do it for us.
Right, so which means we really, really have to be stepping up, and I know a lot of people are, but we always need more, whether it's, coaching kids in sports, which so often keeps them out of trouble and out of drugs, or helping pregnant women.
Yes, helping pregnant women is essential, and helping single mothers is essential. As a church and a community, we have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's ask the question, because that is about being responsible. Let's ask the question of what Victor Davis Hanson brings this idea up in his book, Citizen. What does it mean to be a citizen versus what do you call it? A citizen is someone who takes responsibility for their life and for their town So a neighborhood, like if we were living in an apartment complex, like I live in here in Eagle, if each citizen, or if each resident would be a citizen, we'd be responsible for putting our trash in the trash can and picking things up and not leaving dog poop out. If we were more like serfs or subjects, I was thinking of subjects, then we would just expect someone else to do it for us, right? What does that mean for living in a town, living in a society? Being a citizen versus being a subject. So everything we've talked about comes down to this idea of being self-responsible. This is what I've gathered from you. Is that right?
Oh, to throw the trash down there too.
I've seen it. Right. I've never seen people litter in Meridian. But that's being responsible. So then how does being self-responsible play out to everything else?
Well, I'll tell you about my own neighborhood in Boise, right on the border of both Meridian and Eagle. But first, I want to say that when I was a brand new officer, I was in the men's room washing my hands, and then another officer, a tenured officer, saw me cleaning the sink. And he says, "Hey, that's really nice. You take the time to clean the sink afterwards just like I do. What a good habit." Well, I had done it subconsciously, but after that, I made it a point consciously to continue that kind of a pattern throughout my life, to make the men's room cleaner when I leave than when I walked in. And I've continued to do that.
In public restrooms?
Even after, yeah, absolutely, in public restrooms. Because there's a way, as long as you wash your hands last, and when I pick up, if I see dirty, you'll see a trash can and it's surrounded by dirty paper towels, right? That someone obviously threw it on the floor instead of in the trash can. Well, if I wash my hands and if I use paper towels to pick up paper towels, I'm not putting myself at real risk. I clean it up and then I wash my hands. So the last thing I do before I leave is to wash my hands. But I clean the bathroom first. And so that's just one little example of how I live my life to try to make a situation be a little bit better when I leave than when I came in. And my neighbors are the same way in Boise, where when we moved into this cul-de-sac area, there were half a dozen different families that brought us baked goods or something special to welcome us to the neighborhood. That was marvelous. This was 3.5 years ago. And we found out it's a close-knit neighborhood. And shortly after we moved in, a widow moved in, and my neighbors take turn mowing her lawn. When she's got issues with her sprinklers, they're always there, to repair it for her. There is constant help and attention to given to this widow. And then another woman lost her husband since we moved in there, and same thing. Everybody's rallying around to help another new widow, and so they're going to make sure that everybody is taken care of in their immediate neighborhood.
Yeah. So we have this idea of being self-responsible, and it's seminal, super important, and essential for everything we've talked about, how we live our lives. What are the problems our neighbors in Meridian are experiencing right now? Not just political, not just like taxes, but like what are their struggles? Like my brother and sister-in-law actually live in Meridian here. And they, just had a kid about 2 years, year and a half old right now. And the wife wants to go back to work. Okay. And so the husband, he wants to stop working at Lowe's, where he worked as a manager for like 10 years, done a great job. He wants to start going into being an appraiser, for a house, or an inspector. So they're making the transition where he took time off to train, and he was a full-time dad, or taking care of the kid. The mom started working more from home. What are different stories that you've heard from people, real stories? What are the situations? What are their struggles that you've experienced? Our neighbors here in Meridian.
Well, everybody that I talk to has some kind of financial related struggle that's going on. They're facing inflation right now, but even prior to this dramatic increase in inflation, the worst we've seen in 40 years.
40?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so but everybody by kind of habit has developed this pattern of living paycheck to paycheck. So, they want to upgrade when they can their lifestyle, but it's a constant struggle just to maintain. And then issues related to, everyone's got the same problems related to work and struggles and coming home after a bad, hard day.
What have people been trying to do to fix the problem of living paycheck to paycheck? What have they been trying to do? What have they been trying?
Well, a lot of people are experiencing, trying to look into a little extra part-time work. That's a struggle, trying to cut back in areas. There's people that are doing less right now than they were before in terms of spending, trying to figure out where to cut back.
Where do they cut back, do you think? What are they, like, not eating out as much or ever?
Oh yeah, that's really a huge one. Stop going to the restaurants, yeah. And not upgrading as much. The big companies are trying to always get us to spend more and more and more. And nowadays it's like, well, if you have to live with an old phone that's not functioning to maximum capacity, rather than upgrade to the newest and greatest, just live longer with something that's not as satisfactory to you as it used to be.
What other problems do our people have, our neighbors here? What are the problems?
Well, people are struggling, of course, with traffic because of all the growth.
So what are the problems that our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, are experiencing in Meridian? Like, tell me stories. Like, I told you my brother-in-law story. And I've started a company. My wife is a mother of our 7-month-old and works full-time. A lot of hardships we experience. What are some stories you've experienced, you've heard from our neighbors?
Well, I know someone, a man in his mid-30s that, he lost his job a couple of years ago, and then he started looking around and just couldn't find anything available as far as what he would be interested in. And so he kind of transitioned into that Mr. Mom of 3 children, and then his wife was able to find work, which doesn't pay that much, but they're struggling and making it happen, on behalf of their children. And but he's just in that struggling in between stage of what he could do next, and he'd like to figure out a business he could do for himself, and he's exploring those different options. But it's in that limbo where it's like, well, when you know what you're doing is not quite making it for you and your family, how do you get to that next stage, and what are the risks? And it's a tough challenge, and a lot of people are doing that because they're looking for something that's going to make their lives a little bit better, and people are wondering what that is. And when you start exploring, you see that the potential options are uncountable, but when you try to break it down to practical steps of how to get there, people are really wondering, how do we make our lives better in a way that's not completely risk-free, but not excessively risky?
Is mentorship and being involved in organizations like a church essential for helping you get connected to the right people, being mentored by the right people, and going forward? What are some suggestions you give people to?
Absolutely. It's like, because of my particular background in law enforcement, people will come to me for advice to how to get into the law enforcement field, which is great, because you can't get it from somebody who hasn't experienced that particular profession. And so when we have an attitude of being responsible not only for ourselves but for our neighbors, and willing to put the time and relationship into it, we can help people reach a goal that they want to strive after. And that can apply to anybody in any profession if they're willing to take the time to pay attention to others that might be in that limbo type situation, looking for something better. Put some time into relationship and mentoring, because it usually does take a relationship to get you transitioned effectively into something new. People are putting in lots and lots of resumes, and because everything's done online now and they don't have that in-person interaction with a decision maker, they just get rejected automatically because the resume is not quite impressive enough. But if they have a mentor that can kind of direct them along in preparing for that career, that will make the difference in getting in the door.
100%. What are the difficulties of being a parent and raising, especially being a mother?
Well, let me say I've got recent experience in this, because after having raised 4 kids into successful adulthood, and the youngest of those 4 being 35 years old, my wife and I are now raising a grandson as our own. We expect to have him adopted in the next few weeks.
Why? That's probably a huge story. Why are you raising a grandson? What happened to your child? Your son or daughter?
Yeah, our daughter was doing real well through her teenage years, but when she was 21 years old, she became addicted to meth and heroin. And that's been a struggle, and so she's in her mid-30s now, and so she's been struggling for a long time. She was in a temporarily homeless situation when she found out she was pregnant, and she asked to come live with us, which, because of her history and lifestyle, we would not have let her come live with us at that time in our lives, except for her pregnancy and to save the life of the baby. So we did do that, and it was an extremely difficult time. And it was a year after the baby was born that we decided to look into moving to the Boise area as a better place to raise the child with our daughter. And then she had some incidents occur. We ended up getting a restraining order and became foster parents and then guardians of the child.
Restraining order.
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
With our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in
course.
her life,
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had in the home prior to this change. And so he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another, and but everybody goes through the thing of his child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings, and so there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child. And you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean those restraining order?
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
With our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in her
course.
life,
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had in the home prior to this change. And so he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another, and but everybody goes through the thing of his child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings, and so So there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child, and you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean
issues.
restraining order?
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
with our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in
course.
her life.
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had had in the home prior to this change. And so he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another, and but everybody goes through the thing of this child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings, and so there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child, and you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean
issues.
restraining order?
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
with our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in her
course.
life.
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had had in the home prior to this change. And so he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another, and but everybody goes through the thing of this child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings, and so there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child, and you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean
issues.
restraining order?
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
with our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in her
course.
life.
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had had in the home <clears throat> 'cause. 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 'Cause he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another. But everybody goes through the thing of his child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings. And so there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child. And you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean those restraining order?
Yeah, because
with your daughter.
With our daughter, yeah, because of the influence
of
the
drugs, of
had in
course.
her life,
It's not her anymore. Yeah.
Right. So it was a very difficult time. It has continued to be difficult, but it was helpful for the child to be raised by, me and my wife only, as opposed to the extra chaos that we had in the home prior to this change. And so he had some, residual effects, I'm sure, because of some of the chaos in his life and her use during the pregnancy as well as after and while breastfeeding. And it was a very tough time. So all parents have issues with kids, and some kids are harder than others. All kids are different from one another. But everybody goes through the thing of this child is a little bit different. Either it's a first child, or if it's not a first child, they know that this child has some unique differences from the siblings. And so there are challenges of meeting the specific needs of the child. And you're going to have lack of sleep. You're going to have some occasional illness related.
You mean
issues.
Yeah. The parents will have no sleep.
Yeah, that could be.
Is what
Exactly.
you.
Yeah, and so then parents are trying to perform out of exhaustion instead of out of a complete sense of well-being, and it's quite a challenge. And so that can even make it a little bit harder for the child too, if there's a lot of exhaustion and tension, and because they're going to pick up on the feelings of the parents.
How do you think about raising and training your child, who they want to become? How did you think about it?
Well, our approach has always been, that this child is meant for something other than our dreams for the child. The child's supposed to have his or her own dreams and develop uniquely to who they're supposed to be. And so we try to give a lot of freedom for that, but then it's got to be freedom within set boundaries and parameters, because they've got to grow up to be good, responsible citizens who care about others and want to help others and stuff. So there is that balance between giving them the freedom to be themselves, but also setting the right parameters so they grow up to learn to be responsible. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah. Remind me how many kids you have. I've lost count.
Yeah, we had 4 originally, and so now we say that we have 5 because we included the six and a half.
It was the additional grandkids that really threw me off. And that is how many grandkids?
7 grandkids. So, and I count.
Well, okay, so your kids are adults now. That's right.
Yeah.
Your kids, except for the one who's a grandkid.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. What? So your kids? I mean, what are they? They're probably in their 30s.
Right, and so each of our 4 kids has at least one child. One of them has 3 children. So they.
Where do they live?
Well, we have a son who lives in Boise with his wife and 3 kids, and the biological mom of the one we're caring for lives in the Boise area.
And she's still into other stuff, right?
Yeah, and then we have her older sister and her husband and 2 kids that live in Meridian.
Oh, wow.
And so everybody except our firstborn son is now living in Idaho, and he's still in California.
In LA or San Francisco? Or
In the greater LA area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And what struggles might someone like them experience in building their career and building their family? What are their goals, and what struggles do they have, and how do they overcome them? Or what might anybody who, probably a lot of our people in Meridian, a lot of our neighbors, when they're building families, beginning out in their 30s, what's life like? How do you overcome those goals?
If their income is consistent, they're going to have some times where they get a little bit of R&R, a little vacation time, fun time, and that's fantastic. But everybody's got constant struggles going on. In this world we'll have tribulation, but take courage because the Lord has overcome the world. So there's always hope, but it's kind of a constant challenge to make ends meet and to be thinking about that next step to kind of upgrade quality of life. And so, when you have kids, they just create their own joys and new trials.
We talked about what it means, the struggles of being a mother and a father and parents and raising kids and how you want to train them. And we talked about the journeys of the 30s and building a family. What about your 40s? What is life like in your 40s?
Well, it usually depends on the age of the kids because, as you get older, could be early 40s, mid, late 40s, there's a point where the emotional walls that keep us strong in adversity start to break down a little bit, and we become more emotional people. And if you've had prior experiences along the lines of PTSD or something like that, especially as a man, and my wife always perceived me as the kind of the ultimate alpha male kind of thing, but you find out that you become more emotional and more vulnerable and more feeling oriented, which is actually probably a really good thing, because you really can find that you can really actually connect hearts a lot better, and maybe it's why as you move into becoming grandparents, and we were young parents, young grandparents, where the connection is so strong because men are more tender a lot of times toward their grandparents than they were toward their own kids, where they're trying to be a little bit harsher, disciplinarian, and make sure the kids grow up right. And the grandkids really pick up on that tenderness, and they're really drawn to it. And I've been amazed how attached grandkids get to their grandparents. It's such an incredible joy. And so many grandparents will tell you grandparenting is a million times better than parenting. It's all the joy without so much of the headaches and conflicts and things like that. But that's part of that emotional transition that breaks down. So you start feeling your feelings more, and it gives you a chance to really, instead of being a tough macho guy, to really be a tender, loving person. And and life truly is. I mean, we're designed this way. Life really is all about the love. It's about love of family and love of neighbors. And but my neighbors and I, we talk about how, when there's real crisis in our lives as individuals or in our neighborhood or political crisis, whatever it is, economic crisis, it really does become about taking care of the people who are within just, 200 or 300 feet away from you, and really gathering together. I think about the major earthquakes that have taken place in Los Angeles during our lives, where the family, the whole neighborhood really comes together at the time to support and to help one another and make sure everyone's okay, because crisis does that for people, And when you're young, like as a young police officer, you can have all these experiences which can cause PTSD, but you're so strong against it, you're so insulated that you almost don't feel it. And as a police officer, I used to kind of pride myself on, if I'm in a high-speed pursuit or there's a crime in progress or something, that I could calmly get on the radio and communicate a message for help or backup or something, and start directing the activities in a way that seems so calm, cool, and collected. But underneath the surface, there's a lot of stuff going on that, can kind of seep out in the 40s.
On the topic of being a leader, what do you view a good leader to be?
Well, you could probably list about 20 qualities consistent in, good leadership. And then when you start thinking about the good leaders that you've had in your own life, maybe some of them will meet about 10 of those qualities or something like that. And it could be different ones. Leadership really has a lot to do with integrity, good communication skills, having people know where you're coming from, what you expect of people who follow you as a leader, and being real predictable so that they know what the consequences are of not following the leadership correctly. and and being a good example, not hypocritical, and some element of the ability to inspire others, through encouragement. When people look to a leader, the individual self-esteem oftentimes is very much affected by who that leader is and that leader's response to them. It doesn't matter how old you are, whoever's a leader in your life, whether it's a pastor or a boss or anybody who's in any kind of leadership position, their attitude toward you as an individual is going to have an impact on your self-esteem, for good or for bad. And if you feel that that person helps to build you up, that's tremendous. I had mentioned about this police captain who had encouraged me to go on to his police department. And at one point he made the comment, he said, I have 100 officers under my command in my police station. If I hired you today as my officer, you'd be better than at least half of them just walking in the door because of who you are today.
At 22, he said
Yeah,
that.
at 22 with no law enforcement experience, he looked at my character and judged that he'd rather have me than half the officers that were working for him. But that fed my soul in such a deep way, and my confidence, and that's what made me decide, part of what made me decide that that's the right career for me, because somebody saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and that's leadership. Yeah, and I saw it when I mentioned too that I was involved in a lot of mischief until I was 8 years old, and I was in 3rd grade, and my 3rd grade teacher also had given me a lot of compliments. He was actually the first male teacher that I'd had up to that point, and he gave me so many compliments. He says, Steve, you are really smart. You are so good at math, and you're so good at spelling. You're going to be very successful in life. And he fed me that kind of positive encouragement throughout that year, and I credit his effect on me to turning my life around from being constant mischief, sent to the principal's office all the time, always in trouble, and a lot of times not even understand why I'm in trouble, to being a very responsible citizen as a student. Moving in, he was 3rd grade teacher, so when I moved into 4th grade and beyond that, I just became a responsible student, well behaved for the rest of my years, and I give him a lot of credit for that. And I don't know what else, I can't figure out anything else in my life that would have caused that dramatic change in me other than that positive input that he gave me in his leadership position.
What are the big issues, the big threats that we're facing? We all know them, but let's talk about them. What are the big threats that we're facing in Idaho right now, in Meridian, in Idaho, and in the country and the world?
Well, we know, of course, that inflation is a big effect. We also know that there's an agenda globally for things like open borders and what I would call the dumbing down of America, the weakening of America, because in our position of power as the world leader and kind of the world's police, we've been in a position where we're a lot stronger than a lot of other countries. A lot of those countries are very grateful for the leadership that we have provided worldwide, but a lot of countries are very hostile about it, and they have chosen to be our enemies. And if they can have any negative impact on our society to weaken us, they will implement whatever strategies they can to weaken us. But one of the big things that's facing us immediately is this whole issue of election integrity, because we have this wonderful democratic republic.
Please remember that we're talking, have a conversation. We're sharing our idea. You're sharing your ideas with someone listening to you right now on their phone, on their computer, who probably don't believe the same things that you do. So I'm going to share reasons why you believe each of these claims.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, election integrity, obviously right now for the Republican Party, it's a much bigger and more intense issue, because they're concerned about, is the was the outcome accurate or not? But
Why do you think that we should suspect there was anything awry with the 2020 election?
well, it's a matter of what information we're receiving. I have a good friend of mine who is a liberal Democrat who is registered with the Republican Party, and he says he only registered with the Republican Party so that Republicans are not hostile toward him for being a Democrat. But he is a liberal Democrat, and we have connected our hearts really well, which traditionally I've done with all the Democrats that I've gotten to know. But he had one day he said to me, this is quite some time ago, but he said, do you realize that 75% of Trump supporters believe that he actually won the election and that he only lost based on election fraud? And I said, yeah, the thing is that it's a matter of perspective because we're all listening to different sources of information. And Trump had a team of attorneys, actually at least two separate teams of attorneys, who had been looking into it, and some statistical experts have found that there were some statistical anomalies that indicated that. And then some people have heard of the documentary 2,000 Mules, where they had actually people on film conducting what certainly appear to be acts of election fraud. But because a lot of this kind of information that's put out on social media is being shut down by big tech, a lot of that message is not getting out. And so the people that only get their messaging from the mainstream media, though they might be watching the news on 3 or 4 different channels or more, they're getting a unified message, and an opposite message is being shut down. And some social media sites have actually had policies of, we're not going to allow information about election fraud to be disseminated. But in any case, like I said to you earlier, that I understand that if I had another individual's life experiences and access to the same information they've had, as opposed to the information I've had, I would probably see eye to eye with them on the issues. But we all get different information. And so I explained to my liberal friend, there's a lot of good reasons to believe that there was massive election fraud. The question is, of course, is it enough to have overturned the results? But for a lot of people, they look at that evidence as being sufficient to show that it did overturn the results. But regardless of individual opinions, the issue politically comes down to what are the protections we should have in place, so that what if we had the George W. Bush Al Gore situation where once the other side felt that they were cheated in the election, and now the Republicans feel that they've been cheated. So going down into the future, what protections need to be in place? Well, I'm very sympathetic to both viewpoints, because the one viewpoint is put all of the protections necessary to ensure that we know exactly who is voting and that they have the legal right to vote. The other side is saying, yeah, but we want to make sure that we don't, through that process, keep out people who would be able to legally vote but then don't, because of the protections that we put into place that maybe close the door on some people. So we need to find solutions that address both those issues.
I'd like to point out that my wife, living here in Eagle, couldn't vote because she didn't have a license. She hadn't gotten an Idaho license yet. She couldn't vote.
Oh.
Okay.
Right.
Just so you know, just so anybody knows, it's
right.
It's not just,
right.
Everyone can extrapolate from that what they want.
Right. Election integrity is a huge thing for Republicans right now, but in a sense it should be for all Americans, because a lack of election integrity can hurt either side at any given time in history.
What is the worry? I think anybody listening would ask this question. What actually was the worry would happen in Idaho or happen across the nation. Fake ballots being cast, because we saw videos of people stuffing bunches of ballots into boxes. You see those videos all the time. What actually is the worry in Idaho, Meridian, and National? Just quickly, what is the idea?
Well, the idea is, if people are motivated to conduct themselves in an unlawful fashion and are not being watched, for example, they could take the same group of ballots that they know are for their favorite candidate and then run them through over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, we've seen lots of videos of that. Yeah.
Right, and then when the ballots are recounted, they say, this is the safest election ever because we recounted 10 times. But you're recounting the same unlawful ballots, so it doesn't really prove anything.
That's I've seen videos of that scenario. It does make sense. That's astounding. We have national issues that probably everyone's aware of because they watch the big media. The big media is very prevalent. But what are the actual threats that are here in Idaho and Meridian?
Well, two of the big threats that a lot of people are not really feeling yet because they're not experiencing it in their homes yet are water and food, agriculture.
Okay, water, this is a very interesting topic. We never thought, ever, that food would be a problem. I think it's so negligent, I can't believe it actually is. But the supply chain issue, Walmart doesn't have any gluten-free pizzas in the freezer anymore. I can't believe it that people let this happen. What's the cause? First off, what was the cause of all the supply chain shortages? Like I saw, the idiots running the docks in LA seemed to have a backup. They couldn't figure out how to process people.
Right.
And then I heard news in China that they're laying people off because they don't have whatever. They're not exporting stuff. Why the hell were we getting pizzas from China or pizzas from Italy? Big question. Why don't we grow our own food here? But you go to Trader Joe's and they say all the things are backstocked. They can't get here, or they have to lay off, or they suspend truckers so they can't drive the trucks because they didn't get the COVID vaccine. Driving in a truck by yourself, you need a COVID vaccine for that? Don't know why. Lay out what were the problems of the supply chain? Why we didn't get food, grocery stores.
Well, there were a number of issues related to the truckers, and you just mentioned one of them, but another was the air quality standards issue, which came down on the truckers kind of unexpectedly, because a lot of them are driving older trucks that don't have the high protections for emissions, and they were told that they can't be driving in California until they bring them up to standard. So there's different chains, and again, America's got a lot of enemies, foreign and domestic, and with a different vision that they have for our world than we have, and they don't want us to be by far the #1 country in the world and be the world leader. So they may be, to some degree, intentionally creating some policies that could hurt our country. And we have kind of a faith in the healthiness of God's original design in the food supply, and yet there are people, and Bill Gates has spoken about this publicly, about kind of moving away from real meat, for example, and switching over to the synthetic meats, which are patented and can be controlled by whoever owns the patents. And we could get into a situation where we have less and less successful small farmers who are growing organic food and the real foods, let's say. And there's an issue even now where Chinese investors are buying up lots of American farmland. Bill Gates has gotten into purchasing a lot of American farmland. Well, why, excuse me, why is someone who wants to transition from real meat to synthetics buying up all this farmland? Is it to reduce the real meat supply intentionally so that synthetics becomes our only affordable choice?
You would not naturally think he'd be raising cows on the pasture land. So what would he be using the pasture land for? So it does leave that most likely conclusion that he wants to buy it up to reduce the supply of meat.
Right. And when it comes to real food, you can't patent it and fully control it. But if it's patented, you can control not only the food itself, but if you have seeds for growing more of that food, you can control the seeds. And it's a way to really continue this progress in the area of the rich getting richer and the middle class getting poorer. And so if they consider the entire world their playground, they're not loving America first, they're not putting America first, and they don't want to see America to be by far in the #1 position throughout the world. And that concerns me because, again, we could end up seeing where our lives are being largely controlled by entities that don't even, they're not even from the United States. You know, there's been negotiations with the World Health Organization, for example, because, you know, some people are suspicious of our own CDC because of its close relationship to the pharmaceutical companies and stuff. But it would seem to be even far worse, like we talked about earlier, where control within the community is better than the state, and the state better than the country better than the world. But if we did certain international agreements with the World Health Organization, they could become the organization that determines whether or not we wear masks indoors, wear masks outdoors, mandatory vaccination. Idaho has some really good laws in place to protect individuals and their families in terms of medical decisions. But what if those decisions were overridden by an international organization that has a treaty with the United States?
And you should consider that proposition or that question in terms of maybe you agree with this decision of the World Health Organization. Maybe I don't, but maybe you do. But the problem is, if you cede your power and your sovereignty to a foreign body, how likely will it be that one day they come up with a decision that you don't like, and then you have no recourse?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of people who have been very supportive of, traditionally, of the vaccine programs. I know we raised our 4 kids and went along with all the vaccines that were recommended by the schools, and we didn't knowingly have any problems with that, although we thought in retrospect maybe there was some potential problems with a couple of our kids. We don't know. But, you know, our little guy who's 6.5 now, he did have an incident which was an adverse effect from a vaccination, and so that was a great concern to me. And one of the many reasons, good reasons, why we decided to move to Idaho was to ensure that we're able to make choices for our family on that issue. But then, you know, more recently with the COVID thing, it's an experimental vaccine that has an emergency use authorization without the length and thoroughness of studies that other vaccines have gone through in the past. So people that trusted the vaccine industry for many years were a little more concerned with the emergency use authorization, and plus more reports in the system of adverse effects. And so those that are very grateful for the vaccine program today may not be in the future, and they've got to maintain their individual rights for themselves and their families. So ultimately they decide, and not some entity in Washington, D.C. or somewhere in a foreign country.
So we talked about right now local sovereignty versus being a totalitarian, larger government in the world or in the nation. And what are the other big threats that our people face in Meridian? Idaho and the nation. We talked about food supply. We talked about water. Water is important. And borders, you mentioned briefly.
Right, open borders. is a problem. And, and I've talked to a lot of progressives and Democrats and stuff who are extremely concerned about the open border situation as well, because they want to be able to show and communicate to their friends and neighbors that they're not prejudiced against foreigners in any way. They care about foreigners, but when it's totally uncontrolled and you got massive amount of people coming in, there was concerns even in a liberal Washington, D.C. area by traditionally liberal people, complaining about foreigners coming in to their area, and they had a total of like 6,000 or something, and then the governor of Texas was saying, well, but we get 6,000 every single day, so when it hits home, anything that hits home becomes a big deal then. And so, and if they're unvetted, and many of them criminal types, then everybody gets concerned. So I think that's going to be a big issue. Another issue too is that if the food and water issues become a big deal, then you're going to be looking at the potential for violence and riots and things like that as well.
What if food becomes a problem? What if the food becomes scarce? Like you're saying.
Yeah.
So what if, you were just saying a second ago, what if food becomes scarce? Go ahead.
Well, if food becomes scarce, people, for survival's sake, are going to become very desperate, and they're going to do whatever it takes to be able to feed themselves and their family. And that opens the door for potential riots, robberies, every act of violence to try to take food from those who have it and give it to themselves. And
how could food really be scarce here in America, in Idaho? I mean, we have so many farms.
Yeah. Well, you got to get the food to the people.
Don't we grow our own food here? And why don't we? Why can't we? Why can't we?
We do grow food here, but food moves around from country to country to country. There's the economics of it is that, for example, for years we've been getting the better quality foods from Mexico, and their own people are getting the less quality foods because of economic reasons. But it's got to be transported from place to place. It'd be wonderful if food just automatically grew in our own backyards without having to learn how to farm or something like that, and we could feed ourselves and our neighbors and all that stuff. We don't live in that kind of environment.
We do have a lot of farms, right? Why? First off, is there a threat to farming in Idaho right now? Well, actually, there is, because there's a lot of homes going in that are eating up, right, the homelands, the farms. What is the threat about farms right now in Idaho?
Well, there's a political philosophy that's basically saying that we want to, like we talked about, where people are buying farms that may not want to use them to maximize healthy growth of food. So that's going to be an issue.
The Bill Gates thing.
Yeah, the Bill Gates thing.
Buying up farmland to take it off the market.
Right, and exactly.
To make us eat insects and synthetic food.
Right, and being open about, that, having that kind of a vision for America.
Which, by the way, you hear this report from the Epoch Times that in Sweden, the government is saying we're not going to have certain kinds of food being grown here anymore. That's going to be done in another European country. Have you heard of this?
No, huh?
Sorry. Anyway, it's a thing that's going to happen in Europe. They're trying to say they're going to grow apples there, apples in Washington, potatoes in Idaho, and we'll trade. But you can't grow apples in Idaho anymore. Things like that.
Right.
So anyway, keep going. Problems with farms in Idaho.
Yeah. Well, and then the water issue becomes a big deal too, because the question is, who's got the rights to the water? Will all the small farms continue to have access to a sufficient amount of water to grow the food that they want to grow? Is the water going to become controlled by major corporations who have the globalist vision similar to Bill Gates, and then by controlling the water, they can control agricultural outcomes as well? And if that is a threat, which it is a potential threat because people who are in very wealthy, powerful positions have that vision for America, if they fulfill their vision, we're going to be dependent on them for the foods they choose for us to have instead of the foods that we're accustomed to.
Water is a very interesting topic. We heard a lot about it. I know a lot of people in Meridian have moved from California, so they even heard it too. But the Central Valley had a huge water crisis, right?
Right.
There's a very interesting show that my wife and I were watching last night about the water crisis in California. Very interesting. I forget the title of the show. But it's where, like, the flow of water is some of the, like, for example, in California, the Central Valley was basically a desert. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought water from Northern California to Southern California, so Central California, to grow food. And so it's interesting. It's like the places that are most fertile for growing crops don't have the water there naturally. Is that kind of the idea? Because they have a lot of sunshine. So if we bring water into a place that has a lot of sunshine, then we can grow food. Is that how it works generally?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So then, what? But I've gathered, having that background of the Central Valley and my knowledge, I've learned that some similar things are the case here in Boise. Like when I moved here, there's a lot of farms, and I slowly began to realize that there's actually not a lot of water here. This is kind of a desert down here. But then I hear that we have a lot of water up in the mountains. And then apparently we have like one of the largest reservoirs, I don't know, in the nation, coming from the mountains, and they're stored over here. What's the story with water in Idaho? And we have a lot of farmland. And then also we have to apparently give water downstream to eastern Oregon and so forth. What's the story?
Well, the only thing I know is that, water is going to become a bigger issue in Idaho, just like it has in California. Before I moved here, my research was that Idaho was sitting really pretty, let's say 6 years ago, in terms of their amount of water, and it did not seem to be an imminent threat at that time. Meta's coming in. Meta's going to have access, meaning Facebook, is coming into CUNA. They've got certain economic benefits that Idaho has provided to them to bring them here, and they're going to use a tremendous amount of water. Hopefully,
for
that
what?
water.
For the servers?
I think it's for the servers, and it's a cooling issue and things like that. And maybe most of that water can be recycled and still useful. Right. But these are the kinds of things that are going to require a lot of scrutiny from the legislature in the coming years, because if we say that the water belongs to Idaho, mm-hmm. then what are the threats in terms of states outside of Idaho making claims to a certain amount of it, or financial interactions associated with getting Idaho water? What about the small farmers as compared to a large company like Meta, that, by the way, happens to seem to be very hostile toward all conservative politics mm-hmm. and would probably love to see Idaho turn from a red state to a blue state.
My brother-in-law mentions this to me. He's a very smart guy. Facebook, Google moved into San Francisco. In the last 10 years, San Francisco's died. Mm-hmm. It was killed, destroyed. 6 years ago, LA was fine. Then Facebook, Google, and moved in, and LA went down fast. Just the pure facts. That's both. They're maybe not causal, but they're at least correlation. There's at least a correlation. But then he said to me that no, they lobby. They use their money to lobby to try and form the utopia that they want, and that vision just it separates the rich from the poor in such a large extent, and that they lobby to destroy the city and destroy the middle class. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, yeah, definitely. And the thing is, there was some things, that was taking place during Walmart, during their major expansions into communities where, they basically were going to put let's say, the local plumber out of business.
Okay, so the question is, do we get rid of real estate taxes? What should we do? Because it would help. Taxes on your house actually seem to be really hard. I know someone who lives in Caldwell who doesn't have the budget to pay for taxes this year and has been in a bind, really scared because taxes have gone up. I'm not sure why, but that's the story I've heard a lot. And I can understand that when we're looking at buying a house, even with my mother joining us in buying a house, taxes are going to be that's a significant increase to the already high mortgage prices of the housing prices. So would it be helpful if we did away with residential real estate taxes? And if we did, what would we be trading it for?
Exactly. You have to trade it for something. So people are going to hurt whether there's increases in taxes or fees, which are really a form of tax, and whether it's real estate taxes or sales tax or income tax. It's a hurt when it increases. So one of the options would be to cut way back or eliminate property taxes, but our taxes really are so spending driven. Taxes to a large degree are based on the amount of money that's being spent. So ultimately you got to find ways to reduce government spending in order to reduce the taxes.
Well, again, should we get rid of the real estate tax? Do you think? What's the debate about it? What are the questions back and forth? What are the different options?
Well,
for and against everything.
Again, when I talk to prospective voters, they know they're getting hit from several different directions at one time. And they're concerned about quality of life. They're concerned about making ends meet. And they're not looking at one area as being the single biggest problem area that has to be resolved for the most part. They're just looking at, we need some relief somewhere. So during these times of high inflation, they know inflation is a big problem. So they're looking for some solutions on the inflation issue. Currently, the proposal is if we increase by, several, many billions of dollars at the federal level, we can fight inflation at the local level. Some people are saying the increased debt is just going to have zero improvement on inflation. But people are getting hurt by inflation. They're also getting hurt by every area of taxes and fees. So to attack one is not necessarily a better solution, which is through reduction in spending. That's what really is driving the whole taxation. Fortunately, Idaho has a legal requirement for a balanced budget. So if we spend less, we tax less. So the homeowners a lot of times don't really feel the pinch of the taxes when it's rolled into their mortgage, and if it's set every month. If there's a sudden increase, or if they get into a situation where the lender requires them to increase their monthly payments, that's when they feel it. When it comes to the sales tax, they feel it immediately with inflation because they're spending more. So, and then income tax, they basically feel it for the most part if they have to write a check at the end of the year as opposed to get a refund. So they're not really feeling the pinch that much. So people know they need some economic relief, but they're not pointing in one specific direction. In fact, I heard a radio host here in the Treasure Valley comment that if a subject comes up related to Second Amendment, they get tons of calls into the radio station with people with a tremendous amount of emotion about, their perspective on Second Amendment issues. But when the issue comes up about taxation, there's not many calls. There's basically crickets because people are feeling the economic pinch, but not in one specific issue that they're ready to attack. But they are looking for leadership in the legislature, if possible, or other government entities to determine some reasonable solutions and to fight for those solutions. So some improvement was made in this legislative session this year, but a lot of people were left feeling like a lot more could have been accomplished on behalf of the people in light of the economic surplus to the state and the federal help. So when it comes to the next session in January, what are the legislators going to do? And how hard are they going to fight for relief? Because it's almost human nature, if you have a chance to not reduce the budget, that you're probably not going to reduce it. It's not a very popular decision to fight for tax relief.
How much surplus does the Idaho government have?
Well, it must be
$850 million is the last thing I heard.
right, and it could be even higher than that. So, and that's an irony too, that people that want to take credit for the surplus will brag about the surplus, and then it sounds like some pretty high and impressive numbers. But when you're thinking about, yeah, but some of that could be back in our own pocket.
And we could be doing more with that money because people make better decisions than the government does. Okay, so yeah, education, like the most important issue. What do you think is going on right now? What's the current debate of education?
Well, one of the current debates is where's the money supposed to flow to? You know, public education is not likely to be going away. A lot of families are very grateful for the public education experience that they've had and for the individual teachers that their kids have had. So for the most part, families are pretty happy with their experience there. A lot of other families have felt like that's not the ideal for their family, not the ideal for their children who have unique concerns and personalities. And so they're looking for alternatives. And people are wondering, well, where's the money going to go to? Is it going to go to keep building new public schools? Is it going into buildings, or is it going into the teachers and the children? People are happy to pay taxes that are related to improving quality of education. So that's what we have to measure. Is the money going to create an improvement in quality? So it's very important, I think, that legislators support the strength of the public schools, but with the public school accountability to the parents, so they're aware of curriculum issues and they can help to guide and change and direct certain curriculum issues that are of their concern. At the same time, there's got to be some relief to taxpayers who never utilized the public schools for their children's educations, and so they need relief in their choices as alternatives. So we need to look at all of those angles without hurting one group, but still being able to be a help to others. That's not where the taxation arguments lie. People will pay taxes for education, they will pay for health quality, they will pay for public safety, and they'll do it basically happily. But because budgets are spending driven, they're going to expect somebody, and hopefully the legislators are actively involved in it, in taking a microscope to where the money actually goes. So if we're doing that, we're finding ways where we can reasonably cut spending, then we can effectively cut taxes. And public safety is obviously it's a big thing for me. I'm a big back the blue person. My 3 points politically are back the taxpayers because we've got to provide relief, back the parents because they have to be very involved in the choices made for their children in education and school health care, and back the blue because if the economy does have a terrible downturn and there are desperations for food and water, there will be riots. The police have a tough enough job as it is. They need our support. even right now under current conditions, but at some point conditions could get worse. We need to back the blue. Those are the three areas that taxpayers are happy to pay taxes, but we've got to look at other areas where we can cut back and give relief so that people can improve their quality of life.
We have had the most divisive last 2 years, at least maybe 6 years. I think we're all tired of it. How can we listen to the news and it makes us think about that everyone's like how the news says our enemy is. And so, we think the other side, someone who's a Democrat or someone who's Republican, believes all these horrible things. And we think we think all these things that are true about the radicals and the thought leaders of the enemy are true of the people who happen to carry the same brand as them. But it's not true. Like my CrossFit coach is a Democrat, and he sees very sensible. We agree upon a lot of things, but yet we have different labels. We don't want this. We don't want to fight. We don't want to have this animosity amongst each other. And we've got to be able to relate to each other and have happiness and be able to figure out practical solutions in our neighborhood, in our town. And the more local we get, the more easy it's got to be specific about, hey, fix this pothole, or the road is wrong, got to fix it. Or taxation, or how we can help, how our organizations can help people. How can we go forward? What vision do you have for how we can go forward and get past this biases? And you're Republican, and many people in Meridian, our neighbors, are Democrats. Cool. How can we not be at odds? How can we not get past the idea that whoever wins enforces their will on whoever their constituents are, even if they don't agree? How can we have a cooperation and go through the process of figuring out better solutions? Because we're not God. You're not God. You don't have all the right answers. So how can you draw from the collective wisdom of the people? And how can we the people, be the government and actually believe in a real democratic republic and real America? Real America is that we the people are citizens. You talk about being citizens with responsible. We can't be responsible if whoever gets elected forces down on us whatever their will is. So how can we have a real American democratic republic where you can be our leader for Meridian? What would you say if you're talking right to me and I'm at your door and we're sitting down having a cup of coffee? What would you say to me about the state of how we can fix this together?
Right, absolutely. We're supposed to be a representative government. So I represent District 15, and I represent the people who live there and who would vote me into that position. So I'm not going there as an individual to enforce all of my thoughts and opinions and my perspectives. I'm going there to represent the people.
But everyone's so always in fighting, even at family gatherings. Are we tired of it?
Oh, I think almost everybody's really tired of the divisiveness, the hostility, the disagreements, arguments and stuff that are so unnecessary and unfruitful, because you never convince anybody anyway that way. So, the thing is, most people are like me in the sense of they have tender hearts, they care about others, they want to help us all to get along well to one another and be able to share our ideas in a non-hostile, very friendly, peaceful way. I've always been a peacemaker. And, when a police captain asked me, and when I was in my early 20s, what kind of profession am I going to go to? I said, I want to be a teacher, a nurse, or maybe a pastor, because I wanted to help people. And I have a heart to give back to the community. Well, he ended up convincing me to do a career in law enforcement, which was definitely a helping profession. And in all those areas, and a lot of people think about going into those same type of areas, the helping professions, because they care about helping. And if they go into professions that are not traditionally considered like the helping professions, they do it to help others. So we all have good hearts. We have to stop looking at each other as either being stupid or evil and really work together. I've gotten along great with people on the far right to the far left and everybody in between. And when someone starts off hostile toward me because of my politics, it usually only takes 3 or 4 minutes to kind of break down that wall and have them see the goodness of my heart and my willingness to listen to them, understand, acknowledge their good points that they make, that they are being intelligent and logical, and we can find ways to work together. I'm a conservative, have been all my life, probably will be for the rest of my life, but there's so much common ground between conservatives and liberals and everybody in between. You know, it's not just about how we're going to respond to issues of pro-life, because we all care about babies and we all care about mothers and we all care about people, humanity. So our hearts are all in the right place. It's not just about Second Amendment, you know, do we promote gun ownership or do we try to reduce gun ownership? It's about, we all care about safety, especially safety of children in the schools. We can find solutions, maybe through technology or other ways. There's a lot of solutions that cross the boundaries of conservative versus liberal. When we connect hearts and minds, I'm not going to the legislature to push my agenda. I'm going there to collectively garner ideas from individuals, their thought processes, and when we put many minds and hearts together on common ground with common goals, we find common solutions.
Why do you want to help people? Your mother. Tell me your story of your mother. Why do you want to help people? What drove you to help people?
My mother became addicted to drugs when she was in high school. When she had a little baby in her arms, my only sibling, she got pregnant with me. She desperately wanted to not be pregnant because she knew the marriage was over. And she would have aborted me. And an employee at the abortion clinic, which was illegal at the time, it was 1955, talked her out of it, fortunately, because the employee said, you are going to have a support system around you. So I care about suffering mothers, I care about babies, I care about humanity, and most people feel the same way I do. We can find a way to connect hearts and minds together and find common solutions to our common problems.
Yes.
Well, I lacked a father growing up, and it left a huge hole in my heart. A lot of other people have suffered the same situation in life or something similar. And we all need mentors. I was fortunate enough to have several significant mentors in my life. I've been a mentor over the years. I participated in helping a nonprofit organization specifically to help fatherless boys. And that's the heart that I see in other people around me. So regardless of your political perspective, let's connect hearts, let's work together, let's talk about our ideas, and let's implement solutions together.